Okay, thank you all so much, everyone, for joining us. We are live. This is Left Bank Books Online presents meditation expert and author Sharon Salzberg in conversation with Left Bank Books co-owner Chris Kleindienst. And I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and hope you are all having a fantastic evening wherever you are. I'm going to pass this out to Chris to introduce the store, but I want to tell everyone that we do have signed book plates from Sharon, and we will have curbside pickup on Saturday. Continuing on, but we'll resume that on Saturday, and mailing to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books, and I am so happy to be working with an incredible team here in St. Louis, including Chris Kleindienst. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the event, so be sure to type those up as a comment, and you can ask Sharon a question at the end of the event. And now I will pass this off to Chris.
Thank you, Shane. Yes, Left Bank Books quickly is St. Louis's oldest full-line independently owned bookstore. We started in 1969, so this is our 51st year. This is definitely our most unique year. And as Shane alluded, we are open for online sales, phone sales, and we ship everywhere. We deliver in the St. Louis area, and we also offer curbside pickup, which we paused briefly to be extra special careful about a situation. And we will be back with curbside on starting Saturday. So I am just thrilled and honored to introduce Sharon Salzberg. Sharon is the central figure in the field of meditation, a world-renowned teacher and author. She has played a crucial role in bringing meditation and mindfulness practices into the West and into mainstream culture since 1974, when she first began teaching. She is the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and the author of 11 books, including New York Times bestseller Real Happiness, her seminal work, Loving Kindness, and her most recent book, Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. So that's the book we're going to be talking about, this evening. And this introduction is so modest, really. I don't know if it's possible to describe the breadth and reach and influence you've had on people's lives, really all over the world, but especially in the United States. Before we just get right into the book for the 1,000th and millionth time, will you tell us what brought you to meditation and why you brought it to us?
I'm so happy to. I'm so happy to be with you and to be with you all. I was in St. Louis just once, but didn't make it to the bookstore. And the very fact that a bookstore like that exists was not possible when, say, I was going to college. It didn't happen. And so really that's how I got interested in meditation. I was in college. I took an Asian philosophy course in my sophomore year. And quite honestly, looking back, as far as I can tell, it was kind of accidental. I looked at it and I thought there was a philosophy requirement, so I had to do something. And I thought, that's on Tuesday. That's convenient. I'll do that one. Something like that. And the course totally changed my life. It was in the context of that philosophy class. I heard that there was such a thing as meditation, that you could actually employ methods, direct and practical methods that could help you be happier. So I was going to school in Buffalo, New York, and something happened in me. I look back at that moment too. It's very interesting to me. Like, I didn't think, let me study up more, or maybe I'll do a grad school program in this. I thought, I've got to learn how to do this. I've got to somehow make it real. And so I looked around Buffalo. I didn't see it anywhere. And the school had an independent study program where if you created a project that they liked, you could go anywhere in the world, theoretically, for a year. And So I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they said, okay. And off I went.
Well, we're really grateful that you did. So fast forwarding a bit to more recently, this book, Real Change, you've written about happiness, you've written about love and about work. And what was the motivation to get you started on this project?
Well, it's interesting because I actually turned in the book, virtually the entirety of the book, minus the new preface, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So whatever was happening inside me was happening before really, current kind of crisis. And in part is because I've seen through so many years of teaching, I began teaching meditation in 1974. And so I've seen from my own experience and so many people how being more aware, being more mindful, we see things like the interconnectedness of everybody. That really we might feel very cut off and alone and lonely, but the truth is that our lives are connected all to one another. And I've seen it over and over and over again that people go deeper within. They see this kind of truth. They feel connected to others. The force of compassion really grows, but not everyone sort of knows what to do with it. Like, how do I express this? How do I manifest it? So that was part of my motivation. I also have many friends and acquaintances who are activists of some kind or another, trying to help make this a better world, and burning out by the drove sometimes, really having a difficult time finding balance. I've done a lot of work in the last several years with what I would call caregivers, people on the front lines of suffering, domestic violence shelter workers, international humanitarian aid workers, these days, frontline medical workers a lot. And I see the same pattern, tremendously caring and giving people who want to make a difference and are often burning out, or feeling just depleted. And so I wanted to somehow try to address all of that.
Well, I think that you have. It's really a beautiful and reassuring book, and yes, so timely. Your addressing of caregivers, especially, like you said, who knew? And yet, the pandemic. There's so many ways to go with this line of thinking, but the one is just to back up a moment and observe that not only are you, when you're talking about real change and you're talking about activists who are doing this work, but the burnout, it seems that 4 years, let's just be honest, have been extremely challenging. The tenor of the country, the leadership of our country is frankly mean. It's mean. It's a mean voice. And I would think even more than ever, people are needing to understand that it's that they're okay at the most basic level.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that, how you make those connections in here between it's okay to sit and like focus on your own well-being and how that connects to being an effective change maker in the world?
Well, I should say also that I don't, generally speaking, choose my own book titles. Somehow I've gotten on the real train, and there is like real happiness and real love and real happiness at work and then real change. Real change was actually a joke title for a while because we couldn't think what else to call it, and then it stuck. But I actually am more and more appreciating that word real. Like, let's be real, people are exhausted and there is so much going on. Something I say in the book, actually, is that from the time of the 2016 presidential election, I realized that I had a very traumatic childhood, as many people know, because I've written about it and spoken about it. And it was also a family system where none of this was ever spoken about. Somebody died and it would be too upsetting to bring them up again or something like that, and as well motivated as I'm sure everybody was, the disjunct was very profound for me, to sense things within myself as true, but not having that confirmed anywhere else. And so I realized I have a great sensitivity to deceit, to things not being transparent. And from the time I started watching the news again, at that point I thought, this is going to be very hard for me. And it's going to bring up quite a lot. And not just, of course, maybe the disagreements I might have, or the being upset about what I felt were people being harmed, but just that very deep, visceral kind of response as well. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that I needed to rely on the tools that had been really supporting me throughout my life, because I went to India when I was 18. And so I've had access to these tools since then, and I've relied on them, in good times and hard times and everything in between as well. So actually, when I turned in the book, and then the pandemic came, a friend of mine was reading the book in order to excerpt it for something. And he said to me, he liked the book, but he kept reading the examples and thinking, that's what made you anxious? Wait till you see what's coming. So I went back to the publisher and I said, would it be okay with you if I wrote a new preface that would somehow try to contextualize what we're going through? And so the overarching question for me in the whole time that I was working on the preface was, what's still true? Like in upheaval and disruption and chaos and loss and anxiety and grief and everything else that was happening. Like, what's still true? What can I count on? What can I rely on despite everything? And I really came back to, wow, it's those same tools, Look at that even here as well.
Wow. When you're talking about your very difficult and traumatic childhood, and now you're at this other end of life, which I share with you, peer, and you're saying, that you realized, I guess, after the election that this was going to be tough for you. And I wonder, I'm sure a lot of seasoned practitioners of meditation would not find this surprising to hear from you, but some folks may be newer to the practice. And full disclosure to whoever's listening out there, I am way new. I am 1 year this month, so I'm a baby. But is that you aren't
perfect?
Yes, you aren't perfect. You haven't, some of the guided meditations I've listened to, searching for like what works for me, have been about just, the sort of the sense of letting go. So someone might ask, wait, you mean you still haven't managed to let go of this thing from childhood? What hope is there for me? And but the chapter in this book that speaks to that is your chapter in Grief to Resilience. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could make some connections for us here about suffering and happiness.
Well, I mean, I think maybe the most common misunderstanding I encounter about meditation is that somehow you're going to enter this state of peace alternating with bliss, kind of shimmering around each other. And You will not see the arising of any old patterns or anxiety or sleepiness or anything. And when we talk about meditation in the school within which I trained, or the lineage within which I trained, we really talk about relationship. We're not talking about so much what comes up. We're talking about how we relate to what comes up. And it's very different to have a thought or even that kind of visceral reaction that I was describing in my body, and take it to heart and build a whole identity around it, and then add a sense of isolation, like I'm the only one who ever feels this, and then a sense of failure. I should have been able to stop this before it came up. Why can't I control things? And then, comparison to everyone else who we think is doing beautifully. And then, we have a certain experience, a thought, a feeling, a series of sensations. And if we seize that and add on to it, it's a very different thing than, in a way, having a place of peace or rest from which we can watch it come and go, and maybe have some compassion for ourselves, and certainly awareness and balance and so on. And so we can be so kind of content oriented and so judgmental about ourselves. And really, mindfulness, especially as a meditative approach, it does not matter, because everything depends on how you are relating to what's coming up. And so I know it's odd in these days where it's almost like there's a kind of social cachet. We'd all like to be asked how our most recent meditation was and say, well, I was a little sleepy in the beginning, and then this unfathomable peace just descended upon me, and then it shimmered with bliss. And we don't want to say my leg hurt and I got restless and then I got bored and then I started worrying about something. But that can be a fine meditation, really exemplary, depending on how we're relating to it. And so we're trying to cultivate, you could say, the holding environment or the way we hold things to be more connected, more balanced, and so on.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yes.
So if you're asking me if in all these years since 1971 when I started, if that's changed, then yes, that's changed a lot. So the difference between taking something to heart and adding all that stuff to it and solidifying it and just kind of having it come and go is a big difference, between contraction and expansion, and between all that self-judgment and harshness and just kindness. It's different.
So that's what you talk about when you talk about adding on. You start with that sort of core traumatic memory, let's just say, since we started with that. And onto that, you add the, oh God, what's wrong with me? And just keep piling and piling. And so if I understand this, what you're saying is, you're always going to have that memory, and you're going to circle it probably frequently. And those meditation tools will allow you to, it will give you the resilience that you need.
Yeah, I don't know that you'll always have that memory, but it's not. It's possible, and even when it arises, I liken it to the difference between something being made of steel and something made of gauze. But I've seen so many people, maybe there's no talk about it so much, is that I've seen so many people be so discouraged when they're really doing well. This came up again, or that same slight provocation made me reactive again, but that's okay, because you can relate to it very, very differently. And that's where our power lies. And so in grief, there's a great quotation I heard from someone who said, grief is love that doesn't have the normal place to land. The person, the situation, the ideals, whatever it is that we have had as an object or recipient of our love, of our devotion, it's maybe not here anymore. or it shifted in some way. And so it's a very natural feeling, but again, it depends on, do we hold it in isolation, like I'm the only one? Do we realize this is part of the human experience, that we can actually care about others in that process, that it's not cold or demeaning of the feeling to say, well, I'm going to look for that which helps me be resilient, that helps me connect to life as it is now.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about that in the book in terms of grief and other forms of suffering, to use that term, which you do use. It exists. And then just to be able to sit with that and understand that it's part of all, the whole menu of feelings and experiences that are make up life, that it may feel almost intolerable in the moment, but the moments continue and the moments don't stay the same.
Yeah. I looked over my shoulder because somebody made me a cup. Actually, I don't have it in this room. It says, "Some things just hurt," which, as you know from the book, is one of my famous or favorite sayings, because I think some things just hurt. And it's not because we have the wrong attitude or we're not approaching it in the right way. Some things really just hurt. And I was so happy this friend sent me a cup that it says that. It's a nice size. And but we can add on, which makes for extra suffering, which I think we don't need.
And that's where this, your work and this, which not all of us can make it to your center, but to have these books, I'm holding on to it the whole time we're talking, which I don't know if I can make it. There it is. It's a mirror image for me, so every time I move, it's backwards. Just really such a great resource for turning to those kinds of comforting stories and words. I've also had in my mind a lot reading through this book. Like you said, you have a lot of friends who work in organizations that are helping people or dealing with people who are in, or groups of people in great deal of pain and suffering and nearly impossible tasks to address, and how, you talk to them in here about what they do, how they keep themselves from burning out. What kind of was a unifying thread, or was there something that surprised you in what you found?
I think the unifying thread is something you sort of alluded to earlier, which is it's actually okay to take care of yourself, to get some rest, to take a break, to experience joy, to let in the joy. And sometimes it's very hard. You feel very guilty, and it's difficult, but it's very important. It's very, very important. I have a friend who's a writer, and years ago we were having this conversation about the image that's so often used. It's so funny using any language these days because so many things are not happening very often. Like when you're on an airplane and the flight attendant makes those safety announcements and says, if the cabin pressure drops and the oxygen masks descend, put your own on first before you come to anyone else's aid. And so I was talking to this friend and I said, every one of my colleagues, my teaching colleagues, uses that example. And every one of my colleagues who writes that example. I said, I just don't think I can use it. And then she told me, she said, I was just recently on a plane and there was a woman sitting next to me and they made that announcement. And the woman turned to me and said, I could never do that. I could never put my own oxygen mask on first.
Oh my.
So I said to her, maybe I can use it. It's still really vital and provocative, but that is a hard thing to do. And yet, when we understand that it's not only a question of compassion for others, but compassion for ourselves as well, we come to a much better state of balance. And that's the place from which we can sustain an effort, and not get so frustrated or overcome by it.
Yes, yes. It's such a, it's so hopeful in your book. And I think you even quoted, was it Václav Havel, who said that hope, writing things down out of your book, is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that it is worth doing no matter how it turns out. And that, I also overuse the oxygen mask metaphor with folks that, express a great deal of distress and sense of hopelessness, or guilt, that they've done anything for themselves in the context of just, say, reading headlines. But it's also, the people that you talk to develop this book, these folks they're in it for the long run. They're marathoners, and that's an image I have used because I used to run, and it is a marathon, the kind of change and that we all want to see. And I think right now in this instant world, everything is so instant, right? Just digital now. The idea that we may not live to see the thing that we envision. I feel like you talk about that so eloquently in here. And I worry about folks in St. Louis. We're one of the cities where there is a great deal of incredible activism around social justice, and the Black Lives Matter movement, kind of sprung from stuff here. And those folks work really hard, and they put themselves out there, and they take so much abuse. And they were the people I thought of when the stories that you're relating about your friends who work in organizations. And every so often I'll see someone say on Facebook, "I'm going to take the weekend off, folks, and do some self-care." I'm hopeful that your teachings have reached places where perhaps they don't even realize where they came from anymore. But how since you've done this book, and now we're in this moment of change making and trauma, how have you thought about current events?
Well, first I want to say, because you brought up Václav Havel, that one of the things I'm really happy about with the book, how a book is sort of like it's its own organism or something. So when I say I'm really happy about it, I think, well, you wrote it, But on the other hand, it came into being, it presented itself to me also, and maybe more so. So was the emphasis on art and creativity.
Yes.
And that was born in a way out of a conversation I was having with Bell Hooks. I was in Kentucky and actually teaching at her institute, and we had known each other when she was living in New York City anyway, and we're friends. And so she said something, and she is a person who's extremely exacting about the use of language. I mean, extremely. And that's probably why she's such a great writer. And she was saying she didn't quite like the term social action, because she felt like maybe people would feel like it would be limited to protests and to marches. And what about art? What about those things that really dissolve our sense of the expected and have us imagine a better world or a different world, and sort of the courage of that and the ability to step forward. And so that really evolved a whole series of interviews that I did, with people, largely playwrights, and that there's so many ways in which we can manifest that caring and the sense of being there, not only for ourselves but for others. And And that felt important to me to try to bring forth in that as well.
I loved that part. That said that somebody doesn't have to suffer to be a great artist, or suffer to prove that they really are trying to create change in the world. That isn't the key to it.
I mean, there's
say more about that.
a story in there, which is very interesting, about I was in the audience once. There was a panel at Emory University with the Dalai Lama and Alice Walker, the writer, and Richard Gere, the actor. And the panel was sponsored by the art department. So it was about creativity. And the very first question was something, it was very similar to what you just said. Doesn't great art have to come from great suffering? Which is actually a very Western idea. It's not very Eastern. Where balance and harmony and connection and compassion are seen as elements of one's being that can bring forth great art. And so that was the first question. And first they asked Alice Walker, who said, well, I used to feel that, and she was taught, it was sort of like the way she was mentored, that was true, that you needed to be in a state of great sorrow in order to create great art. And then she said, but now as I get older, I see that the happier I am, the better my work is. So that was interesting. And Richard Gere talked about being an angry young man. And then they got to the Dalai Lama. And there's a certain expression the Dalai Lama gets on his face when he's like confused. Like, huh? Like, I'm not sure what you're talking about, because it's so different, a framework for him. And he said, oh, yeah. He said, people are always dragging me places, basically, and showing me things, paintings and buildings, and saying, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that wonderful? And he said, in Tibet, we consider a work of art great or beautiful, depending on what happens in the mind of the creator as they are creating it. So if the person gets more enlightened, more kind, more generous, more balanced, more wise, that's considered a great work of art. And I thought, well, that's different, right? And we don't think of that in terms of the more conventional sense of social action. And I posed that question in the book, like, what if we thought of our contribution, our work, as part of the valence of how it's assessed is what happened to me as I was doing it? What happened within me, and how did I grow, and how did I change, and so on. I thought that would be a big help, actually.
Wow. Yes, indeed. One of the things I don't know in this new platform we're in is that I cannot see questions. Our air traffic controller, there he is, can, and I want to be sure, I'm hoping that some of your years-long fans and folks with deep practices are watching. I want to be sure, if they are, that they have a chance to ask questions. And so we can keep chatting, but if there's anything floating up yet, Shane, do you
so we do have quite a few questions from the audience, so I'll go ahead and ask some of those, and then maybe we can ask some other questions. Maybe Chris has more questions at the end, but I want to start with a question from Silver, a dear friend of Chris's. Silver asks, in what ways has your intuition grown and changed over the course of your study?
Asking me?
Yes. She's not asking. She's not asking me.
This is Chris. Shane, what do you think? It's grown quite a lot. I mean, I think there are ways in which I think we can actually come closer to what is actually an intuition and what is merely a projection or kind of wishful thinking, because they're different, and I think they feel different within ourselves. And so we have the opportunity to really get sensitive. And I've seen that in myself, like When I left India in 1974, I was coming back to the States for what I was convinced was a very brief visit before I went back to India for the entire rest of my life. So that was not a really good intuition. I was really sure, and it was wrong. But that was also kind of clinging, and I had been so happy there, and I'd learned so much, and I wasn't confident at all that I could sustain that in the States. And it was actually, I went to see one of my own teachers, a woman named Deepa Ma, and she told me that I'd be teaching. She told me to teach when I came back to the States, and I said, no, it's not going to happen. It's ridiculous. It could never happen. And she was like, yeah. And I said, no. So I don't know where my intuition was then either, but other than those kind of convictions, the things have got to be a certain way, I do think we have a kind of sensitivity, don't go there, or really try, go ahead, you're afraid, but you can do it, and things like that. I think that guidance really does come.
So the next question is going to be from Leslie. Starting with a comment, Sharon's loving kindness meditation course on the 10% Happier app has helped me in so many ways. And then Leslie asks to you, Sharon, how do you feel with loved ones who don't like that you have changed? How do you deal with loved ones who don't like that you have changed?
I think with understanding and with wisdom, that it makes people uneasy sometimes. And I think here too, we can listen very deeply, because sometimes what people are really saying is, do you still care about me? They want that reassurance somewhere that you're still connected, that even though you're on whatever path and you're, going through changes, sometimes it's not that, it's more complex or difficult than that, but sometimes it is that. And I think it behooves us to try to assert that kind of care and relieve that particular anxiety. And then the rest of it, it's not to say it's not hurtful, but again, what do we take to heart, and how do we define ourselves, and how much can we understand? We can never control how people will react. We can only do the best we can to come from a good place and speak or act as skillfully as we can, but we can't have absolute control over how someone is going to relate to it. And so there's a kind of equanimity that also develops there.
So I'll give you a comment from Laura. Laura says, Sharon, your teachings have helped me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll take another question from Silver. And this is not preferential treatment. If you have questions, be sure to type them up so we can get to those. But Silver's next question is, you said that you have heightened sensitivity. What do you do to protect yourself when in the presence of intense negative energy?
Some of it, I think, is understanding that one can perceive that energy and have it wash through you, compared to like suck it in, and so it's being centered as best as possible. And that's why, one of the things in the meditation practice, for those of you who have experimented with it, is that very often there's a foundational exercise in meditation where you rest your attention on something like the feeling of the breath, just the normal in and out breath. And then your mind wanders like a billion times. And there's this moment when you're like, oh, gone, where we practice letting go and we practice starting over. And that is a very, very important moment, because that, I think, in many ways is like the rhythm of life. We lose it, but we can come back. Or we get all caught up in someone's energy, but we can recenter. Things like that. And so just having done that for so many years, it's like feeling the breath. But I'm also going to tell you this very cute story from the Buddha. I think it's very cute, where it said that the Buddha was walking one day on this farmer's land, and maybe he didn't have permission, or the farmer didn't like it for some reason. He got really upset. So the farmer walks up to the Buddha and starts yelling at him and screaming and cursing and reviling him. And the Buddha says, "Oh, farmer, if you prepare a gift for somebody and they refuse to take it out of your hand, what happens to it?" And the farmer says, "Well, then it remains with me." And the Buddha said, "Just so, I'm refusing your gift of yelling and screaming and cursing and reviling. It's going to remain with you." So I don't actually say that to people in those situations, but I do think it. I actually do. I think, all right, this is yours. It's not mine. I'm not taking this, from your hand. And so I found that very useful.
That's remarkable. I believe I have a cat now. Sorry. That's a trait, a quality we look for in booksellers, because when people used to come into the store to shop, sometimes they would be in that state of that farmer you described, and it's absolutely necessary to have that sense of separateness there, and understanding about what you have to take and what you don't have to take.
The next question is going to be from Sarah. Sarah asks, how can we cultivate our imagination toward creating a world beyond domination and violence?
I think that's very important, and I think it's always possible. And I think we see it in a person who is acting toward the good. And there are many, many stories like that that may not reach us, but it's really true. And I forget, I think it was Minneapolis, some school was distributing food, and they asked for 7 bags of food, literally, and they got 20,000, people dropping off milk and, bread or whatever.
Wow.
For these families. And this is also happening. But it actually takes some intentionality to find it. But you can find it with your neighbor, maybe, or, in your family, or in your community. And it's really there. It's palpable. That force is also there. And that can uphold all our efforts, that recognition, and can sustain us. And what I've seen, in this time, because I was in New York City, I have an apartment in New York City, which I left in mid-March. I left thinking I was leaving for 2 weeks. I left with my snow boots, and came up here to Massachusetts, where I have a home. I have a house here, and the retreat center next door, the Insight Meditation Society, which of course is closed right now. But I came up here. I had spent the month of February in California, which I realize I keep referring to like it was this epic journey. Like I was in California. I went somewhere. And then I was in New York very briefly, just for a few days. I was meant to stay there in my apartment, but the physical classes that I was teaching were very large, and nobody really knew, about ventilation or, anything. But I just started feeling, this feels weird. It feels really bad here. And, this is before anything shut down. And I thought, I'm going to go up to Massachusetts for a couple of weeks and just ride it out. And but I'm still, of course, in touch with many people in New York. And even before I left, I was about to teach somewhere, and as was the custom, I was sitting in the audience before I went up on the stage, before I was introduced and went up on the stage, and sitting next to somebody who was phenomenally anxious. And so we were talking, and I started suggesting, well, if you breathe in these certain ways, then your parasympathetic nervous system will, that, by the way, that's true. If you breathe so that your out breath is longer than your in breath, your parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of chill, your whole system will start taking over. So your blood pressure will drop and things like that. So I suggested that, and that made no impact. It didn't help her at all. And then I said, well, this loving kindness meditation, which really gives you this profound sense of not being so alone and really connected to others. So that didn't help at all. So then I looked at her and I said, quite spontaneously, I said, is there anyone you can help? And she lit up. It's like she became radiant. And so, I do have this elderly neighbor who maybe she could use some help getting groceries or something. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And being in touch with so many people in New York City through, kind of the worst of that time. And I saw it over and over again. People would say to me, I've lived in this apartment for 12 years. I never even knew the names of my neighbors. Now we all have one another's phone numbers, so we can take care of one another if we have to. And I think that is what really gives us the vision of possibility.
That's wonderful.
We have a comment from Kate. So Kate is saying, thank you for the comment about grief being love with no place to land. It gives me permission to grieve without feeling pressure to get over it. Kathy is asking, in what ways do meditation and yoga intersect?
Well, I think that if you by yoga you mean hatha yoga with asanas and postures, it was really there were very intertwined systems in India, so that people were doing those postures to sort of change the energy flow in their bodies, and so meditation was more tranquil and it was deeper. These days, is often are disjunct, or they're seen as different disciplines, and people who do hatha yoga sometimes do periods of meditation as well, sometimes not. And people who meditate sometimes do yoga, but like within the system where I trained, say in Burma, they didn't so much do yoga, but they have we have walking meditation, so that it was always a mixture of the two.
Raymond asks, during change, how do we let go of frustration due to slowness of change? This can be about changes in a relationship or an effort at work we want to accomplish.
I think, going back to what I said when I was describing meditation, as settling our attention on a certain object, a chosen object, and then it wanders, and then we let go and we come back. In some ways, it's almost like a muscle training, and it's not different than that. We will get frustrated. We will feel overwhelmed. We will lose it in some way, but we can come back. We come back to a state of balance because we can have enough perspective on our thoughts to realize we are empowered, that we have some choice when we can see the thoughts and feelings before we send the email, before we lash out at somebody, when we have a realization of, okay, this is what I'm feeling. Do I want to act on it or not? And this is not a judgmental statement, like I'm a bad person for feeling what I'm feeling or for feeling so frustrated. It's just like, okay, is this what I want to be pursuing or not? I used to say, and sometimes I still do actually, my favorite definition of mindfulness came out of an article I read in the New York Times many years ago about one of the very, very first pilot programs bringing mindfulness into the schools. So this is a 4th grade classroom in Oakland, California. So the kids are like 9 or 10 years old. And the journalist asked one of the kids, like, what is mindfulness? What is mindfulness? And he responded by saying, mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means. And I thought that is a great definition of mindfulness. Because what does it imply? It implies you're feeling angry when you're starting to feel angry, not after you've sent the email, not after you've said that comment, right? And it also implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger, which is really the essence of mindfulness. If you just fall into it and you're overcome and you're defined by it, you're likely to hit a lot of people in the mouth because life can be really frustrating. But at the same time, if you're ashamed of what you're feeling and you can't stand it and you want to hide it and you want to repress it and you get tighter and tighter and tighter until you explode, that's not going to work either. So sometimes we talk about mindfulness as the place in the middle. It's like, okay, I really see what's happening. And in a way, I'm listening, I'm feeling it out. I'm being with it, not falling into it, not pushing it away. And that creates space. And in that space, we have some choice. Like I like to think of that kid thinking, hit someone in the mouth last week. Didn't work out that well. Maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try that. So it's not like we never take action, but we have some space. And that's what we really need.
So I have a question for you. So in college, as part of my acting training, we did a lot of like kind of group meditation. And I don't know whether it was that I always felt like I was like failing in a way because my mind would stray so much. And it wasn't until as an adult I was told like, no, that's fine. Like that's part of it. Like you can't just shut your mind off.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So do you have any advice for someone who like just wants to get beyond that feeling of failure in meditation?
I think that's one of the really invaluable things about books, honestly, and apps and communities, because we all carry those kind of feelings and misunderstandings. Like when I first came back from India in 1974, if I was at a party, see, that's another thing we don't do anymore. If I was at a party or some social situation and I would be introduced as a meditation teacher, the person would usually go, "Oh, that's weird," And all these years later, I think largely because of the science or the research, very commonly in those situations, a person will respond with, "I'm so stressed out. I could use some of that." And I also hear a lot, "Oh, I tried that once. I failed at it." And we believe you cannot fail at it because you cannot have the wrong experience. You can have a challenging experience, but it's not wrong. And if I, have the time and I say, "Well, why do you think you failed at it?" Almost always they will say, "Because I couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't make thoughts go away. I couldn't have a perfectly blank mind. I couldn't keep sleepiness from arising. I couldn't keep anxiety at bay." But remember, we're not talking about the arising of something. We're talking about how we relate to it. That's the key. So you get lost in thought, you can start over. Or you have a thought that you think is like the weirdest thing going, you can watch it, So many things like that. And so to have that understanding and to have that understanding reinforced is a very valuable thing, because I think left on our own without any context, we will likely err on the side of too much self-judgment.
Mm-hmm. I know I did. Yeah. So Laura is asking, can you tell me a little about the third eye during meditation?
Yeah, that's not so much a concept in the Burmese system. It is more a concept both in Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhist practice, where it's like if you go to an acupuncturist, they're working on these meridians, these energy channels throughout the body. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they call it the subtle body. It's not the physical body, but it's this range of energy centers and the connections between them. And they believe not only is that involved in healing, and wellness, but it's also involved in meditative progress. And so the third eye is one of those centers, right there. And for some people in meditation, there gets to be very strong series of sensations there. For others, not. But but it's said to be about the development of it is said to be about intuition and perception and things like that.
So one last question from the audience, and then I'll maybe kick it back over to Chris. So this is from Nikki, who is also a friend of Chris's, or a friend of the store. She is a local author as well, so she's a friend of mine too. So Nikki is asking, Sharon, what is your opinion on using marijuana in meditation practice?
I actually don't have an opinion. I am a child of the 60s, but that was a long time ago. I don't use marijuana personally. And I know, certainly more and more people who are using medical marijuana for sleep and things like that and pain. And, I think that's a wonderful thing to try, but I actually don't know how it would affect my consciousness or maybe affect consciousness in general. So I don't know.
Okay. All right. Chris, I will pass this back off to you. But I want to thank you, Sharon, for the conversation. From the audience, a lot of thanks and a lot of really just expressing how much they appreciate you. So I would like to forward that from the audience as well.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I feel a lot of virtual clapping out there. Much love. And I just want to thank you so much. I want to remind people that I don't know how much of this picture you can see out there, world, but please, this is the book. And we hope that you will, if you're able, purchase one from us. We do have book plates, which Sharon, thank you so much for doing that. Another challenge in our strange virtual world. And I know that you're going to be doing some more talks. If people want to continue to listen, they can find you easily by going to your website and seeing your schedule. And I know you're doing an all-day virtual retreat on September 20th, I believe, which people can find out about going through your.
Yes, I am actually.
That's I did my homework. So I invite people to look further and follow you more. And best of luck with this book. And I hope we get to do the next one in person.
Thank you so much. No, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure.